Welcome everyone to our webinar called Afghan Women Human Rights Defenders Demand Justice and Accountability. It's a part of a virtual site event for the 48th session of the Human Rights Council, and we have a really exciting lineup of speakers today. So the webinar is going to take about 1 hour and 30 minutes, and we'll kick off with opening remarks, followed by the remarks from our moderator, then a 50 minutes of panel discussions from the speakers, followed by an intervention from our guest speaker, then another 20 minutes for question and answers. The event will be in English with simultaneous interpretation in Dari, Spanish, and French. You can change your setting at the bottom of the screen. At the bottom right, you can see an icon that looks like a globe. And from there, you can choose your options of which language that you want. All participants are muted except for the speakers, moderators, and also the backend team. And we also have closed captioning available today, when you can see at the bottom of the screen a button saying CC. So when you click that button, then you can click show subtitle, and you can also see the full transcript when you click view full transcript. To change this size of the text, click subtitle setting and change it to large. If you have any questions, please type your questions in the Q&A box, and if relevant, address them to the individual speaker, and the speakers will try to get them to you during the Q&A session. This event is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook, and the recording will be shared after the event. So also please remember to follow and engage with the co-sponsor at the Twitter, which we'll share here. And our moderator today is Karima Benoon, the UN Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights. You can also find her Twitter, which we'll share very shortly. And also you can read more about her mandate here. So I'll pass the floor to Karima, who will kick us off and also introduce our speakers. So Karima, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It is really an honor to be here, to take part in this event, to partake in feminist solidarity across the internet in these difficult times, and most of all, to have the opportunity to listen to the voices of Afghan women human rights defenders who absolutely must be heard around the world now. So I'd like to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me and acknowledging them for their work in putting this event together. The organizers include the Association for Women's Rights in Development, AWID, FEMINA, Women Living Under Muslim Laws, Musawah, the WHRD-MENA Coalition, the Program on Law and Society in the Muslim World at the Harvard Law School, the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women, and my mandate, that is the mandate of the UN Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights. And I should say, as Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights, I have, like my distinguished predecessor, who's also with us today, worked to try to advance women's equal rights to take part in cultural life, including their right to define and redefine culture in equality, and to determine which cultural practices will no longer be engaged in, as they no longer comport with our understanding of human dignity. I have also worked to try to make clear that cultural rights and cultural relativism are not the same thing, and to reject claimed cultural excuses for violations of women's human rights. And as I come to the end of my time in the mandate at the end of this month, I think that continuing to defend universality, which is the necessary framework for guaranteeing the universal human rights of Afghan women now, is one of the most significant challenges we face. And there are threats to universality, I regret to say, even from within the UN system itself. So we all know why this event is happening. We are witnessing virtually a complete retrogression on women's rights in Afghanistan since the middle of August. This is a matter of grave concern to Afghans, but it should also be a matter of urgent priority for the world and for the international community if it takes its own pronouncements seriously, such as Security Council Resolution 1325 and all the subsequent resolutions on women, peace, and security. We are here to listen and learn and be guided by frontline voices, but also to devise more informed and engaged solidarity and strategies to learn from what others are doing. Afghan women, we know, have always been at the front lines of resistance, and this time it's no different. Sadly, and not surprisingly, yesterday we heard worrying reports from Reuters that Afghan women human rights defenders are facing increasing restrictions and limitations on their ability to protest, so that there have been fewer demonstrations in the last few weeks. Despite all of this, unfortunately, the recent resolution adopted by the UN Human Rights Council in August fell short in outlining concrete measures that would effectively protect human rights in Afghanistan in the current context. This event aims to forefront the demands of Afghan women human rights defenders who are too often excluded from policy spaces and international headlines. And we want to ask, what does accountability and justice look like within institutions like the UN, and why does it matter for Afghan women human rights defenders? On this second point, I thought it might be useful to very briefly summarize the engagement of the UN Human Rights Council's special procedures, the special rapporteurs on Afghanistan in recent months. So the special rapporteurs have been engaging throughout the summer on issues in Afghanistan, including an appeal in early January during the session of the Human Rights Council in response to a number of attacks on civilians, including the bombing of a girls' school. And that appeal called on the Human Rights Council to create an accountability mechanism. The Human Rights Council declined to act at that time. The special rapporteurs subsequently issued jointly several statements immediately after the fall of Kabul to the Taliban, including a joint statement which underlined that it is unacceptable for states to stand on the sidelines when the Taliban, first designated as a terrorist organization in 1999 by the UN Security Council, overruns the territory of Afghanistan. And that statement also called on the Security Council to take appropriate action under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter to safeguard human rights and humanitarian needs of the people of Afghanistan. And it also called for the establishment of a fact-finding mission. Another statement at that time warned of a cultural disaster in Afghanistan and called for urgent assistance to human rights defenders, including those working on women's and cultural rights, trying to flee the country. It also deplored that the world was abandoning Afghanistan to a fundamentalist group like the Taliban, which had practiced, amongst other things, gender apartheid in the past. On the note of gender apartheid, there was a further statement that condemned the Taliban's purported efforts to ban women from sports. And finally, a very important statement by the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women on women's full participation in public and political life, which will, I believe, be shared by the vice chair of that working group later on in the event. What remains outstanding is, of course, implementation by states and by international organizations of all of these recommendations made by the UN human rights system, translating those words into lived reality on the ground. The courage of Afghan women human rights defenders, who are, as the UN Working Group statement noted, at the forefront of advocating for their rights, demands the solidarity of the international community. But that solidarity needs to be shown through actions, not just words. So let us each leave this event with a to-do list to operationalize that solidarity, a thoughtful strategy informed and led by the views of Afghan women human rights defenders themselves. And with that, let us turn to our speakers. Let me introduce them all before opening up to the first question. Zubaydah Akbar is a leading women's rights and civil society activist from Afghanistan. Akbar serves on the advisory board of FEMENA, where she works to raise awareness about targeted killings of WHRDs, to amplify voices of Afghan women and support displaced Afghan women human rights defenders during the crisis. Humaira Rasuli is the co-founder and executive director of Women for Justice in Afghanistan. She is an Afghan human rights lawyer and an instrumental force behind some of the most landmark reforms for women's rights in Afghanistan in the last 2 decades. Zarqa Yaftali has more than 12 years of experience advocating for the rights of women and children. She is the executive director of the Women and Children Legal Research Foundation and also the co-chair of the NGO Working Group on Women, Peace and Security. Humaira Saqib is an Afghan journalist and women's human rights activist. She is currently the Afghan Women's News Agency editor-in-chief. Farida Shahid was the first UN Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights and is a Pakistani sociologist. She works as the executive director of Shirkat Gah Women's Resource Center in Pakistan. And finally, Dorothy Estrada Tank, who will be addressing us towards the end of the event, is the vice chair of the UN Working Group on Discrimination Against Women. And with that, let me turn to our first question. There is some news continuing to come out about the crisis in Afghanistan, though unfortunately less now than was the case a few weeks ago. The international community seems to respond simply to a moment of crisis rather than following up. So please, can you inform us and share with us what is the current situation on the ground for Afghan women and Afghan women human rights defenders in particular? And we begin with Humaira Saqib.
سلام و درود. من فکر میکردم که
Good morning to everyone. I think I have to tell you that after 20 years, we have worked for 20 years so that we can establish basis for human life for the people of Afghanistan. Whereas what happened in Afghanistan and the leader fled Afghanistan, we're back. We're back to 20 years ago. And as said right now, unfortunately, the voice of women have been silenced, and they are trying to silence the voice of women. And the fact that the Taliban will not let women go to school, go to universities. And the person who is the head of the dean of the University of Kabul cannot control the situation in the university, and women do not have the right to work. So now a lot of people have been driven into poverty, and they have become beggars now, and you see them all over. And all of the women have lost their jobs, and the women journalists, for example, women who worked in the national radio television have lost their jobs, and they have told them not to go back to work until further notice. And therefore, women cannot work in the radio and television, national radio and television. And so women do not have the right to work anywhere. However, women in Afghanistan have not submitted, and we have seen women after the Taliban declared all of this that they opposed, and they took to the streets. And I know that everyone has heard what the Taliban had said. Unfortunately, what happened was that demonstrations have been limited. And many people have been apprehended and put in prison. And so women are scared to join the people who demonstrate. And recently, And recently they have issued a memorandum that women cannot have mobiles where there's internet. And so they want to control the internet and limit it. And so they don't want the news to go out of Afghanistan, specifically when it goes back to the women's issues. And when we speak about human rights, specifically when we go to the rural areas, people know each other, they're small communities. And so the Taliban have attacked people who are human rights activists, so that these activists cannot have access to other people. The ones who wanted to go to Kabul had to move and to hide, and maybe even go outside of Afghanistan. And the ones who have remained in Afghanistan, specifically in the rural areas, is a big issue. Also, organizations that work on women's rights have been attacked by the Taliban, have been raided by the Taliban, and they, at this time, the space that exists is a horrifying space. Even the men who were journalists have been oppressed by the Taliban. And I'm sure you have seen the pictures. One of them has lost his sight. And there were a number of women journalists who are not being supported even by their families. And so the society does not accept them either, and the Taliban have attacked them, and many of them have been apprehended. And they don't let them to broadcast their news. So usually when women participate in demonstrations, they're stopped, oppressed, and they don't let them demonstrate in any manner or form. For example, sometimes a permit is not issued for demonstrations. Therefore, the human rights activists, specifically women, are being very much limited in Afghanistan. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this compelling testimony. Zubeida, could you help us to complete the picture?
Thank you so much, Karima. And I think Humaira John summed the situation up really well. We all of a sudden see that women's presence in public spaces has been eliminated. It has not shrunk. It's not that they can be in some places and not in some other. They just don't exist anymore. Women who had jobs a month ago, they were leaving their home to contribute to the social and political life. They were taking active part in the society, are now imprisoned in their homes and scared for their lives. And this is a very scary situation. Journalists and free media are attacked every day, as Humaira says, which makes it even more dangerous, because now we don't hear about the situation anymore as we used to. They're being suppressed. Human rights activists, civil society activists are in hiding, trying to evacuate. The options for evacuation are becoming limited while they're facing threats every day. I have spoken to journalists who have been pulled out of their house. Their houses have been searched. They have been threatened. They have been detained for hours. in an attempt for the Taliban to suppress them, because these are media houses who have always been outspoken about the atrocities that the Taliban committed before they took over, and they have been reporting since the Taliban took over. Middle school girls are not back to school yet. It has been 14, 15 days that the schools have opened for primary, for girls and boys, and primary schools are open for girls, but middle school and high school girls are not allowed to go back. Universities are not open yet. Female government employees are not back to their work. There is no clear explanation as to why this is happening. The Taliban government officials says that they are trying to find appropriate jobs that they think that are appropriate for women government officials. They are saying that the reason that they are not reopening high schools and middle schools is that they want to create the right environment. While girls' education was always segregated in Afghanistan, always middle school was segregated, girls and boys studied separately. We are not sure what that really means when they say they want to create the right environment. Their caretaker government has no female members, cabinet members. It does not reflect the ethnic diversity of Afghanistan. And all of this goes to speak as to how it was naive to trust the terrorist group to take over a country and to move it forward and to be inclusive, to be fair, to be able to govern. The Afghan people knew this, and now we see it in action. We see that none of the things that they claimed in their peace agreements, none of the things that they claimed in their media appearances were true. They did not keep up with that. They are not capable of running a fair government. They do not believe in diversity. They do not truly believe in the rights of in women's rights, human rights. They do not believe in the existence of a civil society, in the existence of free media, in the existence of a society where people can live in dignity. The result of that is that they use violence and they use imposing fear to oppress anyone that opposes them. And that just happens to be women more than anyone right now, civil society activists, human rights activists that are being oppressed, and they are being pushed out of the country.
Thank you very much for those compelling words. And I think given this grim human rights landscape that you're both describing, the next logical question is to ask how women human rights defenders are resisting and pushing back. What are the strategies that are being used or being contemplated now? And let's turn first on that question, please, to Zarqa.
Thank you so much, and on WHRD, and pleasure that I think my I am
Zarqa, I'm sorry, I think we're having some trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me?
That's better, thank you.
Yeah, can you hear me? I don't know what's the problem. Can you
hear
me
now?
Right
We
now?
can hear you. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you from all of the organizers for organizing of the event and to raise and hear the voice of Afghanistan women, especially women HRDs in Afghanistan. And it is my pleasure that I am among you. I am unfortunately the situation become change in Afghanistan, and before.
And I think, unfortunately, we might have lost Zarqa there. Zarqa, can you hear me? Of course, the technical challenges.
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know, maybe. Yeah, I know there is some problem in my net connection. And unfortunately, 50 days ago, all things changed in Afghanistan, and it was not a positive change. It was negative change, and the impact of this negative change was on all people of Afghanistan, especially women of Afghanistan, because women and children are very victim of each of all kind of change in all countries, especially in Afghanistan. And women in Afghanistan lost their achievement, the achievement that we gained during the past 2 decades, with lots of sacrifice and struggles, and with lots of sacrifice, we lost lots of our women, brave women, that they lost their lives to gain some things, or to gain basic rights for women and children and girls of Afghanistan. Unfortunately, now we go back to the zero position that we started 20 years ago, and now we don't have nothing. Unfortunately, we lost all of our legal system. We had very nice laws and regulation regarding to gender equality and the women's rights in Afghanistan. We lost the two institutions that we had for women, Ministry of Women Affairs, and also Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. Now there is not these 2 bodies in the structure of the current government in Afghanistan. There isn't any signs of woman participation, woman political participation in the current government, in the Taliban government. They always emphasize that we are going to establish an inclusive government with participation of women in the country, but we saw that there wasn't any signs regarding to participation of women in the leadership of the government. And now they are saying that women don't have the ability to be as a minister, to be as a director in the different organizations. So we are not putting them some hard back in their cat. So this is the situation of women in Afghanistan. Our girls, they don't have access to education in the country. We had a large number of women that they work in the different institutions as a government worker and as a worker of civil society organization. But now we have nothing, and we lost of all of our achievement and gain, unfortunately. And what the main issue is that which kind of resisting and we can do. As you know, in the current situation, there is lots of restriction from the Taliban to all people of Afghanistan, especially for women of Afghanistan. But this was the women of Afghanistan that they didn't be silent, because during the past 50 days, we saw that this was the women of Afghanistan that they raised their voice through different areas. The women of Afghanistan protested. The women of Afghanistan are going to demonstrate and asking for their rights. They don't want too much things. We are just asking for girls and women political participation. But now we are saying that the Taliban are trying to sit and to put some restriction on the protest and demonstration of women as well. They issue a decree, and in this decree they said that they put some difficult point for demonstration and protest in Afghanistan. But with this, being of these restriction and limitation, our young girls and also the women of Afghanistan are trying to organize another protest in the country. And I am in the different group of women from the different provinces of Afghanistan and Kabul, and we are trying to organize different kind of protest and demonstration in Afghanistan. And today we had it was a small, but we had a demonstration of women as well. And also the next things that we can resist that we can do in this time to how we can push the in the current situation of Afghanistan, the most important things that will be useful and has good impact in the situation of women of Afghanistan, and especially HRD. This is the pushing of international community. This was the international community that they took the position of silence in the past month in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, in the past month, several times we asked from the international community, and we raised our voice that please cut the silence position that you took, and please stand with people of Afghanistan, especially with women of Afghanistan. But I don't know, all of the international community and the world leaders was silent regarding to the situation of Afghanistan, and also regarding to the situation of women in the country. And so I think the pushing of international community, and if they stand back with women of Afghanistan and they support women of Afghanistan, I think it is the good way that women can, with support of international community, continue their resistance against the Taliban and ask for their rights in the country.
Thank you very much for that. I'm particularly struck by what you said about sort of the zero position, the idea of so many of the achievements of the last 20 years being erased and undone, so that at this moment of systematic violations of women's human rights, the mechanisms for redress and accountability have themselves been dismantled. And I'm also struck by what you said about the obligation for the international community not to be silent at this time. So let's turn also to Humaira Rasuli to address this question of how Afghan women human rights defenders are resisting and pushing back in this most difficult environment. Humaira Rasuli.
Thank you very much. So as the rest of colleagues mentioned, it's heartbreaking to see how quickly the last 20 years have been wiped away. Taliban promised to respect the rights of women, but in practice, the Taliban has raided offices, homes, scaled security forces, and civilian, cutting off vital services for women across the nation. They stop women from working who are the breadwinner of their family. They have banned girls from returning to secondary school. So the Taliban-led government has ordered only boy and male teachers to return to the classroom. They are beaten and viping women journalists and activists and ban protests. We have seen remark by Taliban leaders, mentioning that women's role is to reproduce children. Women without mahram is like a chocolate to be melted. Women without hijab can cause men to be sexually attracted. Women won't have the capacity to be assigned in the leading position. So they are forcing people to follow their strict and extremist role by monopolizing Sharia interpretation to arm and suppress women power. But women activists from all the world, shall come in solidarity to not let the Afghan women and children face a dark future and loss of their rights. Currently, although most of the organizations working for women's rights are closed in Afghanistan, and those still open or under scrutiny of the Taliban government, monitoring the situation of women's rights is also getting difficult because most of the media organizations are closed, and the other remaining media organizations are still censoring themselves to not be in clash with the Taliban. But few organizations or NGO are still functioning. Why they are functional? Because mainly, those top level activists that they are out of the country working around the clock and helping their team from, behind the scene and not, giving them power and tools and resources that they need in order to fight at that front. So as the world notice, Afghan women are doing fantastic job in monitoring the women's rights situation and conducting some protest and advocacy for women's rights to education. I especially impressed by our young leaders from the entire Afghanistan who are coming on the street, demanding their rights to education, work, and freedom of movement. You may see videos and image shared on social media that the Taliban were violently beating, harassing women protesters, firing shots into the air, grabbing cameras from the reporters, and threatening women. But women do not take any, they did not let women to take any photos or videos, but women are, Afghan women did not give up. So like I recall on Afghan women who are in exile and to our international sisters to not let the courage and amazing Afghan women who are fighting at that front alone and pushing for their rights to education and work.
Thank you very much for that. And that really leads us to the next question, which is, given this human rights situation on the ground, given the strategies that we've heard that Afghan women human rights defenders are using themselves, how can we assess the international community and international policy response, and of course the regional response as well? How have these bodies and actors reacted to the situation, and has that reaction been appropriate? And let's begin on that question with Zubeida, please.
Thank you, Karima. I'm gonna respond to the question by saying what we expect from the international community, what they should be doing, and that is because we haven't seen action from the international community. I think to begin with, they need to be truthful about the war in Afghanistan to their people. They need to be accountable for their part of the failure in the country. They need to learn a lesson so this does not happen again. This is about the lives of a nation. This is about shattered hopes, dreams, and aspirations of a nation who believed in a better future for their country, and they fought for it every day. They voted, risking their lives. They worked, risking their lives. They every day getting to work for an Afghan was walking on a landmine because the Taliban were blowing themselves up every day in different parts of the country. And with all of that, we had hopes, we had dreams, we had aspirations, and we are the last ones fighting right now. Afghan women standing up, protesting every day are the last ones fighting, while the international community decided to walk away and decided to come up with a narrative that puts the blame on everyone else but themselves. So the first step would be to be truthful and to be accountable. The next thing is that now there are talks of aid, international aid coming back to Afghanistan in different forms. Aid was never impartial during the past 20 years in Afghanistan. The past 20 years, international aid backed a corrupt government. Are they going to back a terrorist government this time? This is a very important question for me as an Afghan that I need a response to. There needs to be mechanisms that ensure aid goes directly to the people of Afghanistan, not to a terrorist group, so that they can use to strengthen their terrorist agendas. This is a moment to reflect for the international aid community on their ways and to change their ways if they know that they have failed. And they have failed. They did fail the people of Afghanistan. No major indicator has changed when it comes to maternal mortality, when it comes to child mortality, when it comes to access to food, when it comes to access to education. We might report on the rates of enrollment, girls' enrollment to schools. We never talk about the rates of withdrawal. We never talk about the challenges that came as a result of the wrong international wrong international involvement in Afghanistan. There are a lot of lessons to be learned, and this time I think by engaging with a terrorist government, they need to be extra careful about their operations in a country like Afghanistan. I hear about international aid organizations reopening and resuming their operations, but they now have different entrances for female and male employees. They have different workspaces for male and female employees. Are they being complicit to a terrorist group? Are they complying with the rules and regulations of a terrorist oppressive group? By complying to these rules and regulations, are they really serving the Afghan people? Are we gonna call this being culture sensitive again? and operate in Afghanistan, spend money again, and empower a terrorist government, and ultimately fail the Afghan people. Yes, you might feed a few people. Yes, you might hire a few people, and so that they can feed their families, and you might be able to implement a few projects here and there. But now the Afghan people have lost everything. If your aid is gonna do harm, then take it away. Your governments left Afghanistan. Your politicians decided that this was not an investment anymore. Take your aid and walk away if you're going to do harm with your aid instead of serving the Afghan people. And I think the other thing that the international community can do is to make sure that there are independent entities that closely monitor human rights situation in Afghanistan, and they hold the Taliban accountable, not for what they're doing right now, but for everything. For the past 20 years, for everything they did before that, and for everything they're doing today. Girls are out of school. Afghan female teachers are not able to go to work. They protest and they're suppressed. And then instead of solidarity from the international community, we get silence. How is this acceptable? In what part of the world right now, little girls are being deprived of education, except for Afghanistan? How is this happening on the world's watch and we are silent? But our international aid organizations are going back and providing life-saving support to the Afghan people, while little girls can't go back to school. And lastly, I think they need to ensure that transitional justice is in place. The people who killed us 2 months ago through suicide bombings in our schools, in our universities, in our places of worship, in our wedding ceremonies, are now walking on those same streets where they blew themselves up. And we have to see them in the eye every day. Every day, they're governing us. How is this okay? And there are no questions about this. Everyone is talking about engaging with them. Everyone is talking about finding ways to work with them. But no one is talking about how our wounds are still fresh, and we have not forgiven these people, that they're terrorists and they have killed our children, our mothers, our friends, and our families.
Thank you very much. I think it's absolutely essential that we demand that the international community apply its principles to the way that it engages, or at least I should say its stated principles, to the way that it engages in and with Afghanistan now. The word we keep hearing is pragmatic, that everyone is adopting a pragmatic approach, so-called, which is essentially subverting many of the human rights values that states have been claiming to uphold. And I would say on the issue of accountability, I think that you are pointing to something that is absolutely essential. And I am very disappointed that, for example, it appears the consensus position now in the Human Rights Council is not for a fact-finding mission, but instead to establish a special rapporteur on Afghanistan. And while this could be a positive development, I must say, as a special rapporteur myself, I know that such a position, which is a volunteer position, would not have the resources needed or the capacities to actually do the kind of sustained fact-finding that is essential in view of the number of violations by the number of actors that we've seen in Afghanistan. So just to add that to the discussion before bringing in a very important voice, which is the voice of my distinguished predecessor as Special Rapporteur, Farida Shahid, who can share with us also the regional perspective, because very important to remember the way what is happening to Afghan women will also affect women in the region, and very important to listen and learn from what Pakistani women human rights defenders are doing in response now, and also your assessment of the international response. Farida Shahid.
Thank you. I'd like to start by saying thank you and saluting all those women and people in Afghanistan who are standing up for their rights, who despite everything are coming out. We have you in our hearts. Unfortunately, we cannot be there with you, but believe us, solidarity, feelings. Trouble is, how do you convert those feelings into practical action? So yesterday also, we had a South Asia-wide meeting with Afghan friends to see where do we go from here, how do we make a difference? I think it's absolutely clear that the international community has completely failed Afghanistan in decades of failure. And Mehbooba Siraj put it one way in terms of her message to us, the neighbors, the neighboring countries, hopefully not us, the neighboring countries and states, is that it's time to have a hands-off policy. She described it as sometimes she feels that she is a cow and she has all these people surrounding her, wanting to cut out bits for their own agenda of Afghanistan. So her clear message, and that of other Afghan friends who were there, was stay away, stop it, stop interfering. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't do anything. It means you should stop trying to push your agenda there. And I think, as you know, Karima, a special rapporteur in Afghanistan is, I'm afraid, not going to achieve very much. Although there are special rapporteurs in the past also, we've seen how effective was the special rapporteur on Iran. Useless. You're usually not allowed to go into the country. So there is that, I don't think that's a good idea. I do think we are, apart from the human rights aspect, Afghanistan is facing, it's on the brink of a major humanitarian disaster with food and with medicines completely finishing, with the winter coming on. And I think the commitment that the international community has put of 1.1 billion, I think it is, US dollars to be given, I don't see that happening. And my big question is, we need to figure out how that money is actually going to be transported. How is it going to move into Afghanistan? The banks are not functioning. And I think it's critical that we put pressure on people to ensure that money gets there and that there is oversight, including human rights groups oversight of how that money is used, where it's going, etc. Not that we've seen it so far, but that is something that people, they should be absolutely, I'm sorry, no sanctions or trade embargoes. That ends up harming the people of Afghanistan. I don't think it's going to harm so there's talks of sanctions and trade embargoes. I think that's the wrong direction to go on. If my Afghan sisters think differently, please say so. But I have seen so many of the sanctions actually harm the people of the country much more than they do anything to the government or whoever has taken over. I think, so that's one aspect, money. We as neighbors, we've been told we are not allowed to work with the people who are coming across the borders. So let me speak a little about those people. Now, of course, you know, the 35 million Afghans are not going to leave Afghanistan, but there are those who are under particular threat and insecurity, they are leaving. However, the situation is that the government of Pakistan, I saw in the chat, somebody said the UNHCR and UNAMA was not responsive. They're also not responsive because, for instance, the government of Pakistan refuses to accept their status as refugees, which has international law framework to it. A lot of people are coming across the stories of atrocities I will not go into as we hear people, but one of the problems is that you do not have legal papers. So when they're coming through, there's no legal papers, there's no legal status. Even those who have onward visas elsewhere, they are not being allowed to board planes sometimes because they don't have an exit visa. So there's a whole area that we're not looking at in terms of those who are leaving. The South Asians continue, and not just from Pakistan, from the neighbors, Sri Lanka, from India, from Bangladesh. Everyone is trying to help people who are at particular risk. I mean, everyone is at risk, but those who are under particular risk because they're in the media. You now have children who are separated from, you know, as they travel across. There's a number of people, they're in the thousands. How many, we don't know. But people, children who have lost their siblings, parents, whatever, they've been separated. And there is zero attention on this. So I really think that we need to push the UN to actually focus on what is the status of people who want to leave, who are at risk in particular. There has to be a system where Pakistan, Iran, Tajikistan, all the neighboring countries give refugee status, open their borders to people who want to leave, and that there's security there. Inside, I think the only thing that I would say, which is a ray of hope for me, is that people agree that while the Taliban has not changed at all, Afghanistan has changed. So you have more women who are educated, you have 8 to 10 million students. We've seen this. Hopefully, that is something that will continue to have that resonance of protest, however bad the situation is, that some people are able to speak out. From the South Asian perspective, we are trying to put together a network. That was the decision yesterday, that we would try to put a network together. What we've so far been trying to do is simply connect people with other people. As I said, in Pakistan and in the neighboring areas, the space for civil society itself is drastically shrunk also. So we are unable. So the request is that we put pressure on our governments. Our governments usually do not listen to us. So while we're trying to do our best, how much leverage we have, we will try every means possible to try and leverage our government into being more sensible. But that is the news from, I guess that's more or less what I wanted to say. I'll come back with other questions.
Thank you very much for that. And I think you're right that networks are so critically important right now, creating the structures for those networks to be able to function. And another problem that we've all been witnessing is, of course, that international organizations and even governments have to some degree abdicated their responsibilities to civil society, even sometimes referring you to civil society for assistance when you go to governments. And certainly the role of civil society important, but it's not an alternative. You know, it can only really fill in gaps, resource wise.
Just one more thing.
Please.
That the UNHCHR will not act. It will not come to the fore unless the government of the country does something. So if Pakistan does not take a position, they cannot act. So they're completely useless in the situation right now. So that's why it's really important to try and put international pressure on all the neighboring countries, especially our own, so that there is a more sensible view and policy. Sorry.
Not at all. I think that's such an important point and a call to heed. So at this moment, let's turn to the question of the demands of Afghan feminists to the international community and international policy bodies now. To some degree, we've already begun to address that, but let's just very briefly turn to each of our Afghan women human rights defender participants to hear any further thoughts they have about this specific issue of specific demands to the international community now. And let's turn first to Humaira Saqib.
من پیشتر من صحبت‌های خانم میشنیدم که مردم باید با مردم در ارتباط.
Yes, I heard Ms. Shahid saying that people and people have to talk. But when we look at women in the region, like Iran, like Pakistan, like other countries, also in China, they should pay attention and cooperate with the women of Afghanistan. We shouldn't forget that ISIS, Daesh, is working with the Talibs. When we talk about Daesh or ISIS, we should remember what happened to the Yazidi women by them. So we shouldn't forget that Daesh exists, and they may go to Pakistan and they may go to Iran and other countries. And this is a very important issue. And I think this may happen in years in the future. And the other issue is regarding the international community. What I want is that the Human Rights Council deals specifically with women's rights. What I mean is they should not support men who believe in patriarchal culture and disregard women's rights. We should tell men that no one supports you if you violate the rights of women. But I see that no one takes issues of women seriously. So what we're asking is that the special rapporteur on human rights in Afghanistan should go into this issue. The other issue is we know that the Taliban disregard all human rights laws, standards as well. So if there will be a dialogue with the Taliban, the first thing, the priority should be the issue of women and women's rights. We know that Afghanistan accepts Resolution 1325, and we think that this is being threatened, seriously threatened. Also, the fact that the international community is silent about the education of women in secondary schools, high schools, we are all the same. So the fact that girls don't go to school should not be accepted. The other issue is that international community should support the organizations, specifically the journalists, the news agencies of women in Afghanistan. We know that the narrative of women about the situation of women is very different than the narrative given by a man regarding the situation of women. So all the news agencies who work on women's rights should be supported. I told you at the beginning, I told you that women are begging now because of the fact they have been stopped from working. So human rights organizations should help them out. And what's very important is that the women's institutions in Afghanistan do have the power to talk about human rights. And that's why I ask other human rights organizations to support us.
Thank you very much for that. It's been appalling to see the pictures of all male international diplomats meetings with Taliban representatives in recent days. That absolutely is unacceptable. And I like the suggestion from Geeta Sahgal in the chat about calling on governments to have all female delegations in any dealings with Afghanistan. Just because we're running out of time, let me ask the other Afghan women human rights defenders, and I'm sorry, to please comment briefly on this question of your demand to the international community, turning now to Humaira Rasuli.
Thank you very much. To add what other sister mentioned, so I would recommend particularly the international community to support the people by humanitarian help, as well as the civil society, and they should put pressure on the Taliban to follow international commitment like women's rights, human rights. And on the other side, the international community should not recognize the Taliban government as a legitimate government. I also recall the international community and civil society sister of Pakistan to put pressure on the government of Pakistan to close down the madrasas and the Taliban bases in Pakistan permanently. The international community should provide aid, but also works towards creating sustainability in people's lives. So not just focus on their survival. The Taliban should be pressured to reopen the NGOs, allow local NGOs, including women business, to be open. The Taliban should not stop blocking education and work for Afghan girls and women. So no ifs and or buts should exist. The Taliban should be pressurized to follow other Islamic countries, such as Qatar, Morocco, Indonesia, Malaysia, and many other Muslim countries in their implementation of Islamic law. Respect freedom of the press, religion, human rights of people. So including women and minority rights should be considered seriously. Afghanistan should stay in the UN and also G7 agenda until a sustainable political settlement is found. I personally believe that women organization and other civil society should be funded to continue their activism, especially to not let go of their 20 years achievement. This can be considered in a project setting that is independent of the Taliban regime. I also recommend that our international friends and community should provide direct financial and political support for exiled Afghan politicians and civil society activists who are committed to human rights and the fundamental value to continue their work in exile and to preserve the achievement of the last 20 years. So the Taliban and their supporters have hijacked our religion, but we won't keep quiet. So we will try our best to equip leaders that they are in Afghanistan with a tool and resources to reclaim the rights of women and challenge patriarchy. But without financial support, we cannot continue our work on the ground. So my special recommendation to all international community is to continue their political, moral, and financial support to Afghan women human rights defender and civil society organization to keep some level of achievement of the past and put for and pressurize for more sustainability approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Zarqa, to you very briefly, I'm sorry, on your demands to the international community, and then to Zubaydah afterwards.
Yeah, thank you so much. My demand from international community is first, I am just asking them that the evacuation process of international community was a full process for all women of Afghanistan, because they wanted to provide some energy and going of people from Afghanistan, and because of this, all of women's rights leaders, journalists, media women, and also activists are still in Afghanistan, and they are facing with lots of problems. The international community, especially those countries that they were involved in the peace process and also in the war process of Afghanistan, they want to just share the figures and also the rate that we evacuated 100,000 people from Afghanistan, and this figure is not for those that they are really activists and they are a really media person, and they are still in Afghanistan and facing lots of problems and threats, and their situation is not clear. It is not clear that what will be happen with them today or tomorrow, what will be happen with their families, because the Taliban now they are not showing their real face with the world, because they have fear from the world that maybe if they show their real face with their world, and also to start violence against women, so then the international community will not recognize them. So I have concern about all of activists, women's rights leaders that they are in Afghanistan, Afghanistan, and they are really in threat. And my demand from international community is that they should stand again and support women of Afghanistan, because the current situation is the result of corruption and also escape of the leadership of government, but it is also the result of irresponsibility of international community with people of Afghanistan, especially for women of Afghanistan. So if they stand again and support women of Afghanistan, I'm sure that that we can bring a change in the current dark situation of Afghanistan. And also my demand from international community is that they should start their humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan, because Afghanistan people is very poor people, and nowadays we are really in an economic crisis in the country. So this is the people of Afghanistan that will be victim from this situation too. So I'm asking from the international community that they should start their humanitarian assistance, but they should not recognize Taliban through a humanitarian assistance. They should distribute the humanitarian assistance through UN bodies, through INGOs, and through NGOs in Afghanistan, because these are those people that they can identify needy people and they can distribute this assistance to those people that they really in very bad situation, and they are in the economic crisis, and they are facing with the life and death if the humanitarian assistance couldn't be reached to them. So they should start humanitarian assistance, and they should be with the women of Afghanistan again, and they should not forget the women of Afghanistan again.
Thank you very much. Zubaida and Farida, you can each have 1 minute, if you would, to address this question, and then we look forward to hearing from the Vice Chair of the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women. So first, Zubaida, the floor is yours for 1 minute, please.
Thank you. I think the images of women protesting the Taliban and standing against them that are coming out of Afghanistan are a testament to the resilience of Afghan women. They face the Taliban knowing that they might get killed, and they do it anyways. That means they are not victims, they are fighters, and they'll keep the fight going. And my urge to the feminist organizations is to stand in solidarity with them and to elevate their voices. Don't look at them as people that need to be saved. Look at them as people who are fighting a terrorist group on your behalf. They're doing it for you single-handedly in a country that's taken over by the Taliban. And for the international community, I have talked about it earlier. I just want to insist that they need to make sure that their aid to the country does not do harm, that it reaches the actual people of Afghanistan, that it does not empower and strengthen a terrorist government, and that in the name of being culturally sensitive and serving Afghan people, that they are not complicit, that they do not comply by the rules and regulations and beliefs of a terrorist group. Continuing your operations while separating women's offices from men's, by taking women's jobs away from them and giving them jobs that the Taliban think are more appropriate, I think you're complying. Don't do that. When you complied with a terrorist, with a corrupt government the last 20 years, it didn't do good to anyone. We all failed. Everyone failed. This is not going to work again. Don't think that you're going to do it this time and it's going to work. And then for the international community in general to continue supporting free media, especially women-led media. This is going to be important. The space is shrinking. These people want to continue to raise their voice, whether they're in Afghanistan or outside. They still have the connections if they have left the country. And if they're in the country, they're risking their lives to speak up, support them, elevate their voices. And I don't know if it's appropriate, but I have been in connection with a woman-led media in the country who have been doing weekly publications every week talking about women's issues. Right now, they're in dire need of financial support. I have helped them start a fundraising campaign. If it's allowed by the organizers, I would like to share the link here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Farida Shahid.
So just to say, Zubaida and all my Afghan sisters who brought this up, we are in complete solidarity, and we understand perfectly that this is not just a question of Afghanistan, that you are the front leaders for all of us. We are already seeing the impact here. We also have our Taliban. They are linked to the Taliban in Afghanistan. And it's not just Pakistan. We already have people, girls being withdrawn from schools, from higher education, as well as from jobs in some of the districts in the north. We have also heard this discourse resonating in Iran, in also Tajikistan. You suddenly have these voices who are repeating the Taliban voice, even as far as Indonesia. So I think we're not doing it on your behalf, we're also doing it for ourselves. So you and us have to come to solidarity and understand it's going to impact all of the region. And if there is an economic meltdown in Afghanistan, which is where it seems to be heading, that meltdown will go across all of the region as well. So we are in this together. Thank you.
And I think that regional and international perspective is so important. I think about this also as the daughter of an Algerian father. In the 1990s in Algeria, the worst jihadist killers were those who had gone to fight in Afghanistan, where they also committed atrocities and then came home with their training. So the sense of solidarity and the sense that, as Zubaydah correctly says, that Afghan women are really fighting a fight for all of us that impacts all of us is so important to share and to spread. And with that, I am very honored and thrilled to introduce the Vice Chair of the UN Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls, Dorothy Estrada Tank, and the working group has done such important work. It's been so good to collaborate with them, and they issued a very important statement recently on Afghan women's full political, cultural, and social participation. And so I hand over to Dorothy with pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the organizers. Thank you so much to Karima Benoun, Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights, for moderating, and to all the speakers, because it has been really a learning experience, a listening experience, and a suffering experience as well to hear you. And confronting that, I would like to reiterate what has been said before, that we stand in solidarity with you, and all of us, I think, from our different spaces and scopes of work are trying to do as much as we can to really amplify the voices of Afghan women human rights defenders. And we commend the courage and resilience of you and of the groups you represent, the groups you are working with, and all women and girls in Afghanistan. As part of our mandate as Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls, which was added specifically to the name of our mandate in 2019, we are dismayed to see the rapid rollback on women's and girls' rights, as we have also confirmed listening to the speakers today. And this retrogression is of course in contravention of international law, but as has been said, it will also undermine peace building and development in Afghanistan for all people. And it also holds these regional risks that have been stated before me. So we are concerned also about the invocation of culture and religion to justify discrimination and violent practices against women and girls, and to use that to deny them access to education, in addition to other basic rights. And as has been said before, human rights mechanisms have emphasized that neither cultural diversity nor freedom of religion can justify discrimination against women. So we would like to see that in conflict transformation processes, as we have seen in other countries, sometimes these processes present unique opportunities for the elimination of discrimination against women. But they can also, of course, result in regression in the absence of timely action and political will. So we think that this is more than ever a time to reaffirm universality, interdependence, indivisibility of women and girls' human rights. Afghanistan is legally obligated to uphold women and girls' human rights. One of the speakers was mentioning before the acceptance of Afghanistan of Security Council Resolution 1325. Also, Afghanistan is state party since 2003 of the UN Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which we have to reaffirm now more than ever, and hopefully this can be a useful tool for organizations working on the ground and for transitional justice processes, as Subaida Abkar was mentioning. And so we as working group have reiterated that this situation in Afghanistan currently does not carry with it a choice between providing humanitarian support and protecting human rights. In fact, human rights law, which has stronger and broader standards, should be the guide, with human rights of women and girls at the center, to guide any action in respect to Afghanistan. We have also highlighted in our report of this year, and it relates to, in part, to what is happening in Afghanistan, how sexual and reproductive health rights in a crisis are not adequately prioritized. And we have heard from organizations in Afghanistan how adolescent girls and abortion services are especially neglected, well, in many countries, and we hear how sexual and reproductive health rights are affected as well in this scenario. So these rights also have to be at the center of any transformative process. As was said before, also humanitarian aid has to prioritize adequately gender equality, and we need accountability, as is the central piece of this panel, to have accountability for atrocities and violations that have happened in the last 20 years, not only in the current scenario, including at the hands of NATO and US forces, as many organizations have been reaffirming. And we have seen also how this pullout of educated women or women journalists, academics, judges, and so on has happened since before the current scenario, and we have denounced this as well as a working group. So what we have asked the General Assembly, and we reiterate today, is that we would call for a cessation of violence, of intimidation and oppression, both by state and non-state actors in Afghanistan, and to place international human rights law and rights of women and girls at the center, and to ensure the continued implementation of UNAMA's mandate with a gendered lens, of the mission in Afghanistan with a gendered lens. Also, and as Special Rapporteur Benoni was saying, we would advocate for a fact-finding mission and not for a special rapporteur on Afghanistan, a fact-finding and accountability mechanism that can also guarantee for, or try to guarantee for, reparations and full reparations and guarantees of non-repetition as well. And we want for humanitarian assistance to actually place women and the participation of women at the center, and to protect Afghan women, civil society, human rights defenders, and including their family members in this process, and to avoid retaliation. Now, we know that, of course, this is these are wishes and these are requests, and that this depends, for this to happen, on an enormous amount of factors, but we still think it important to place this at the center, to keep on saying it, to keep reaffirming the need of placing human rights of women and girls at the core of this discussion, and for you to know that as human rights mechanisms, we are there to keep on doing this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very principled and important statement. And I want to try to get in as many questions now as we can. So I'm just going to give a question maybe to one person to answer. And the first question that comes from our audience is about how we collectively envisage and advocate for feminist futures in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, and in the wider region and supranational level. So I think really about how we coordinate our efforts on many of the issues that we have raised here internationally. Does anyone have any thoughts specifically about this coordination function? Would anyone like to jump in on that briefly?
Well, Karima, as you know, since both of us were part of the Women Living Under Muslim Laws Network, to me, networks are hugely important. And one of the reasons that I became part of that was when we were living under military dictatorship, where all our rights were being taken away in the name of Islam. And I think we need that solidarity. We, as I said, are trying to set up a South Asian thing, but we really need to be led also on this by our Afghan sisters in terms of what is the best way to offer support for Afghanistan. We can tell you what we need, but I think that networking is super crucial, but on a more regular basis, not just occasionally, to see how because the situation is also very fluid.
So the need to really institutionalize our networking and formalize it to the extent that we can, create structures to enable it. I think that's such an important point. And actually, with your forgiveness, it's such an important question. Let me see if one more person would like to come in on this question of the networking and the working together internationally to achieve the demands. Would anyone else like to address this, Zarka?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I think it is very important that we have the coordination and solidarity of all feminist organizations and also those organizations, our sister organization, in our at the regional level and also in the global level. I'm sure that if conservative government established in Afghanistan, it will have effect first on our neighbor countries and then and regional countries, and then will be effect on at the global level, and all people will be affected from the situation of extremism in Afghanistan. So it is very important that the feminist organization and also our sister organization, they should stand with us. Currently, we start the Afghanistan women movement, and in this movement there is lots of women leaders across the world, and they are committed for their commitment regarding to women of Afghanistan. So if feminist organization, they should try and they should establish their connection with women leaders and also women organization in the country, and they should stand and they should awake the world main leaders and take their attention to the situation of Afghanistan and to the things that is happening in Afghanistan, the violation of women's rights and also the violation of human rights. I think it will be the good start for us, for all of us, to make the coordination and solidarity again.
I see one more hand, but maybe Humaira, with your permission, I can ask you a different question that's in the chat. There are several questions actually asking about using religion and trying to mobilize religious institutions and alternative interpretations of religious laws as a tool for Afghan women. And I know there are multiple tools and multiple strategies and different views about this question, but perhaps you would like to comment on that, and if not, feel free to address the networking question. Humaira. Sorry, Humaira Saqib.
بکنم که منظورتون کدام اومایراست بخاطر که ما اومایرای زیاد داریم در اینجا. شکر الحمدلله.
So that was what I was going to ask you. It's very important to say that we're all Muslims. But we have another reading of the Quran, like other Muslim countries that have other interpretations of Islam. What I think is that we can learn from other countries like the Indonesian people or the Egyptian people and talk about it with people. For years that we have worked on women's issues, we have talked to people. The story is, do people accept that if women work, that they're gonna instigate men sexually? Or the fact that women should always be accompanied by other men who are their family members. Is this acceptable by the people? So we have to keep a dialogue going and talk to people. And now I want to talk to Karima. One thing that's very important, what the international community can do, we have to lobby. Specifically, all the feminist organizations in the world or the region, we have to lobby with them so they can put pressure on the cabinets so that when they come up with policies, for example, Imran Khan talks about the Taliban, whereas Pakistan, there are feminist organizations. They are the ones who should put pressure on the parliament of that country and also keep a dialogue going so that the policymakers in other countries, so that women in Afghanistan should be waiting for a pencil in their hands. Why should this be a dream for Afghanistan women? It's really horrible to think that women in Afghanistan are going to go back to those years.
Thank you very much for that. And now, unfortunately, I need to wrap up what I think has been an incredibly rich discussion. And let me say, I think there are a few key themes. One is the responsibility of the international community to pressure the Taliban to respect human rights and women's human rights, but also the responsibility of international actors themselves to act to make sure that those human rights are realized. I think we're also reminded of the need to work on multiple fronts, both to support Afghan women who have been forced to flee and are now in exile, but also those who are continuing the work inside. We've also stressed the need to work together in networks and to try to institutionalize those networks. And above all, the need for Afghan women human rights defenders to be in the lead and for all of our strategies to be informed by their views and concerns. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity to listen to so many of you doing such important work. And finally, I would add, as Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights, how important it is, as so many have said, to reject the cultural and religious excuses and attempts at those and hold the line firmly, including inside the UN system, against sort of cutting Afghan women off and Afghans generally from universality, as if there's some sort of particular situation in Afghanistan and a separate kind of rights that applies. That is absolutely wrong. And we have to reject cultural relativism, I think, as really the foundation of our work here. So let me thank especially our Afghan women human rights defenders, speakers, as well as our regional and international speakers. Let me thank all the participants for listening in these over-Zoomed times. Let me thank the organizers and the interpreters, especially. Thank you for putting up with my speaking so fast, as my students know. And finally, let's all of us commit that our meeting here today is the beginning or the continuation of our work together, not the end. And let's each write down, coming out of this meeting, 1 or 2 concrete steps we are going to take to follow up. And I look forward to the organizers sharing with us a summary, and in particular, a summary of the demands. And I leave you with with the words that a brave Afghan woman human rights defender shared with me in Kabul in 2011. She said, optimism is key to survival. So let us work together with vigilant optimism to defend the human rights of Afghan women, which is also a way of defending the rights of women everywhere. So warm solidarity to our Afghan participants. We are with you, and we look forward to continuing to listen to you in these difficult times, and we send you strength and hope.